All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're talking about a company that's basically the beating heart of India's entire financial system. It's called the National Securities Depository Limited, or NSDL. Now, you've probably never heard of it, but it's this invisible giant that quietly handles every single trade you make. And for the very first time, it's going public. So think about it for a second. You're on your phone, you tap buy on a stock, and poof, you own a tiny piece of a huge company. It feels instantaneous, right? Almost like magic? But it's not. That share isn't just some bit of data floating around in the cloud. It has to go somewhere. It has to be held, kept safe, and perfectly accounted for. So what really happens in that little moment after you hit the button? Well, back in the day, you'd get an actual piece of paper, a share certificate. It was clunky, slow, and you could lose it. The big idea that changed everything was dematerialisation. It's really just a fancy word for taking that physical paper and turning it into a secure electronic record. Your shares basically become digital entries in a special kind of account, kind of like how money works in your bank account.
And the place where a massive chunk of all those digital shares live, that's NSDL. It's one of only 2 central securities depositories in all of India. You shouldn't even think of it as just a regular company. It's more like a core piece of national infrastructure, like the power grid or the highway system, just for finance. It's working silently in the background every second of every trading day.
And when I say it's a giant, I am not kidding. Just look at this number, 302 trillion rupees. That's the total value of all the stocks, bonds, and everything else NSDL was holding in its digital vault as of early 2023. To give you some perspective, that is roughly the size of India's entire GDP. This isn't just some business, it's a financial fortress.
So, being the market's vault keeper is obviously a huge responsibility. But how does this thing work as a business? How does this giant actually make its money?
You'd probably guess that NSDL makes all its cash from, holding securities. But take a closer look. That's actually only about 40% of their revenue. The biggest piece of the pie, more than half, comes from banking services. Turns out, NSDL isn't just a vault. It's a much more diversified financial machine.
Yeah, so NSDL has its hands in a lot of different pots. They charge annual fees to companies and brokers just to be plugged into the system. They take a tiny little slice from millions upon millions of transactions every single day. And on top of all that, they manage these massive databases for things like KYC verification and even run their own payments bank.
Now, as big as it sounds, NSDL doesn't have the whole field to itself. The entire Indian market is what's known as a duopoly. It's a 2-horse race. And this is where things get really interesting.
So on one side, you've got NSDL. It was the first, set up back in 1996. It's the heavyweight champion, holding way more in terms of the total value of assets. It's the go-to for the big fish, the large institutional investors. But on the other side, you have its rival, CDSL. It came along a few years later and has completely captured the retail market. It has way more individual investor accounts and is the leader when it comes to all the new accounts being opened.
In this chart right here, this really tells the story of NSDL's dominance. When you look at the sheer value of shares being traded, we're talking the big money, NSDL handles almost 70% of it. It is, without a doubt, the backbone for the institutional side of the market.
Okay, so far, this sounds like a pretty incredible business, right? But with any potential investment, you have to read the fine print. And for an IPO, the company is legally required to tell you everything that could possibly go wrong. So let's look at the risks. And this is coming straight from NSDL itself.
And look, this isn't just our take. This is a direct quote from their official IPO filing. An investment in equity shares involves a high degree of risk. They have to be this blunt. It's their way of saying, hey, pay very close attention to the details. So what are those big risks? Well, first, there are the market risks. A huge chunk of their income is tied directly to how active the stock market is. So if we hit a bear market and trading volumes dry up, their revenue takes a direct hit. Then there's that constant battle with CDSL. And there's a real danger that if they don't attract the new fintech brokers, where millions of younger investors are signing up,
they could start losing their grip. And then you have the technology and operational risks. At its core, NSDL is a tech company. The whole operation runs on these incredibly complex and secure IT systems. That makes them a massive target for cyber attacks. They even state in their own documents that a seamless disaster recovery is not guaranteed. Plus, they have to pour tons of money into constant system upgrades just to stay ahead. Which, of course, brings us to the main event here, the IPO itself. So with all this in mind, why now? Why is NSDL deciding to go public right at this moment? Are they trying to raise a bunch of money for a big expansion?
Well, not quite. And this is a really crucial detail. The IPO is something called an offer for sale, or OFS. What this means is that the company, NSDL itself, won't see a single rupee from this whole process. Instead, this IPO is purely a way for its existing longtime shareholders to sell a part of their stake to the public and cash out.
And who are these big sellers? Well, it's a who's who of the institutions that helped build NSDL from the ground up. You're talking about IDBI Bank, the National Stock Exchange itself, SBI, HDFC Bank. They're all selling off a piece of their holdings. For them, this is the chance to finally realize a profit on an investment they made decades ago. All right, so we've looked at what NSDL is, how it makes money, who it's up against, and the nitty-gritty of the IPO. Let's pull it all together. What does this moment really signify? You know, the easiest way to think about it is this. NSDL is the essential foundational plumbing of India's entire capital market. It's totally invisible to most of us, but absolutely critical, and it's been running things behind the curtain since 1996. This IPO, this is the moment that this crucial piece of infrastructure opens its doors to public ownership for the very first time. And that leaves us with one final massive question. NSDL was the pioneer. It's the original giant that built the digital system that we all rely on today. But as markets get faster, as technology evolves, can the giant that built the system stay ahead of the curve? That is the multi-trillion rupee question that everyone will be watching.